Hello there, and welcome to another insider story of GFC News. Back in 2010, FIFA awarded Qatar as the host of the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Since then, Qatar has been surrounded by controversies concerning abuse of human rights and exploitation of migrant workers. Qatar being the host of the World Cup came as a surprise for many, as their high temperatures in summer makes it highly complicated for the event to take place in June, July, besides only having one FIFA-regulated stadium in the country. The solution, moving the event to November and build 7 new stadiums with air conditioning to control the temperatures inside each stadium. In order to have these stadiums ready, Qatar hired migrant workers who has been subject of exploitation with facilities in poor conditions, lies and delayed salaries, and no option to leave the country or change jobs. In other hand, every team captain has been prohibited to wear the armband of One Love during Qatar's World Cup. This armband promotes the LGBTQ rights and equality for everyone in a nation where homosexuality is illegal. The Western criticisms to all the controversies around Qatar has been called out as hypocrite due to their neglection to address the inner human rights problems in the Western countries. A French satirical newspaper released a caricature where they portrayed Qatar soccer players with guns, knives, playing soccer. To understand why Qatar has been called out more than other hosts like Russia back in 2018 and China in 2022, we went to Sean Ryan, a professor of political science at St. Thomas University in New Brunswick, Canada. Dr. Narayan did his BA honors in political science and MA thesis in political science in the University of Alberta and completed his PhD in the University of Toronto.
So I don't know that the issues of human rights, the issues of homosexual rights in particular, it seems to me, have been quite high on the agenda for the past decade or so when it comes to these sorts of sporting events. And so when sporting events are held in countries like Russia or China that have human rights, significant human rights issues, then these things do attract attention, they do attract protest. And so I think in Qatar's case, there was just another thing added to the list, right? But it's a curious problem. I mean, part of what I see happening is what I would think of as sort of the weaponization of human rights, right? That human rights has become a very easy to utilize cudgel or club that Western countries use against other states. And the subtext to the whole thing is that these other states are less civilized. They're less advanced than Western states. Now, maybe in one sense that would all be fine if it weren't for the fact that so many Western states have massive human rights problems of their own. And we don't talk about them, we don't think about them, or we've normalized for them in a way that makes it very easy to ignore that they're going on. But they're there, right? And I think that's an interesting part of the discussion. Like, first off, have we weaponized human rights? And secondly, is that a smokescreen behind which we tend to hide our own problems with these sorts of issues? And there are a number of things at work there. Like, there are a number of questions and dimensions at work there. Westerners tend to claim, okay, even if we have human rights issues, at least at a legal level, an idealistic level, where we're trying to do something about them. And I think there's a certain element of truth to that. But on the other hand, there's not hard to find many exceptions to that kind of an argument. And I think the more accurate representation is that we simply have become so used to these things we don't notice them anymore. And so I do think that it gets more complicated than we want it to be. Like, do we have, before you start throwing stones at other people, you should really make sure your own house is in order. Now, the comeback to that, and I think it's a perfectly legitimate response, is to say that you shouldn't let the good or the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And so if we don't have perfect human rights records, does that mean that we're never in any position to criticize anybody else? And then, how many other people end up disenfranchised or their rights violated or their situation made worse because nobody is speaking up for them at all. And I think if you look at the situation in Qatar, it is interesting because the Qataris are arguing that ever since they got FIFA, they have made significant improvements in their human rights approaches, particularly in the way they treat migrant workers. They brought in things like minimum wages. They've reduced some of the restrictions that they had previously placed on migrant workers. They actually, in many ways, put their best foot forward, knowing that the whole world was coming to them. Right. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, I mean, maybe these things will stay after the world moves on. I assume that they will, because many of these are changes in law that have been introduced and brought in, and there's a good chance they will remain and they'll continue to build on those things. So from that point of view, Qatar has actually, from a human rights perspective, Qatar has actually gained quite a bit from trying to raise its standards. But there are obviously some things that, for example, the situation with gay rights, where making those things legal would be very much in violation of very strongly held cultural norms. And so, you can't expect countries that come from a certain tradition to change overnight. And so, again, I suspect they probably have moved a certain distance in terms of accommodating things like gay rights. But right. They're not going to be like us very quickly on those issues. And you were mentioning earlier, Cesar, that article by Ms. Fernandez in Al Jazeera, and I read that before you came. And yeah, she makes excellent points. I mean, again, this is the difference, I think, between Western rhetoric and Western reality. And the rhetoric is that we have a huge amount of respect for human rights, and we have all these rights and privileges that are protected in law. And then there's the reality that a hell of a lot of people within our own societies clearly don't agree with those things. And they're more than happy to kill people, and in the United States in particular right now, there are many states that are bringing in laws that openly discriminate against trans people particularly, and against other groups, both racially and in terms of other kinds of minorities. And so this isn't a settled deal, right? I think, again, you get back to that question of don't throw stones unless you've got your own house in order. And it's a much more problematic order than I think many people want to admit.
Thank you, Dr. Noreen, for meeting with us to discuss the Western hypocrisy demonizing Qatar as it hosts the World Cup for the first time in history. There is no doubt there have been questions surrounding Qatar's treatment of the LGBTQ+ community and the exploitation of migrant workers during the construction of Qatar's new infrastructure for the World Cup. But the controversy certainly runs deeper than the issues Western media is putting in the spotlight. Dr. Noreen sums up the media storm around the event accurately in calling out, and I quote, the weaponization of human rights. I hope this interview gives listeners food for thought on the Western perspective of the East, racism, and the societal and cultural perspectives we need to adopt when scrutinizing other countries, as if we're not committing the same acts under a guise of ignorance and total media silence in the Western world. Thank you for tuning in to GFC News. This is Emma Cook, signing off.